Okay, guys, hello, welcome. For those of you that are back from the last WebEx, thank you for coming back, and for everybody new, and I apologize for whatever that annoying beeping sound is. I do not know what is wrong with my computer, and like Cindy said, hopefully we won't have technical difficulties this time. So what we're going to do first is I've just made a PowerPoint that I give my own students that I was going to go through with everybody as some hints, which is what you're seeing on the screen. This all came about after, for years, when I taught this class at first. I knew I taught it. I taught it. I knew my kids were getting it, but their test grades, their grades on the exam just weren't where I expected. I didn't understand why they didn't do as well as I expected them to do. So I applied to be a reader, and after going to the reading that very first year, I realized what the problem was, and that the problem was I didn't know how to teach my kids to write so that they can get points. And as a reader and now as a table leader, one of the things I hate to see is when a kid, there's lots and lots of kids that don't know anything. And I don't mind giving them no points. But then you get to a kid that you can tell actually knows something. They've actually learned something in their class, but yet they get the same grade as the kid that doesn't know anything because they didn't follow the rules, whatever the rules are. And that kills me as a teacher because I know that that's what my kids used to do. So that's what started me to make this PowerPoint to teach my students. So here we're going to go. I don't know why I just did that. And now they're going to make an announcement. Maybe not. Okay. The first thing, these are just a couple of multiple choice hints. Remember to teach your kids, today's webinar is just on the FRQ, but just a couple of multiple choice tips to make sure that the kids understand that lots of times there's more than one correct answer and that they need to pick the better answer. And also that some kids tell me that they think the test got easier. Other kids say it's hard, easy, hard, but just so that they understand. I always think the first 20 on the released exams, which are the matching, are pretty tough. So I tell my kids to stick with, don't give up in the first 20. That's all I have for multiple choice. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Okay. Cindy, are you still there?
I'm here. And we don't actually hear any beeping. You were talking about beeping, but everything's going smoothly on this end.
Okay, good. Okay, so the first FRQ point hint that I tell my kids is that the FRQ is going to be worth 10 points. Now, most FRQs are going to be actually worth 11 or 12 point possible, but they can only get a 10 point. They can only get 10 points. So after they've gone through and this hint number one is understanding after we've gone through the whole PowerPoint. Once they've gone through the whole thing of they've answered the entire FRQ, to go back and count their points. See if they've actually got 10 or more answers. That answer might be an identify and a describe or something like that. So this question, FRQ hint number one, will make more sense in a minute. I recommend to my kids to answer the FRQs in this order, starting with number 4 first, then going to number 1, then going to number 3, then going to number 2. And the reason for that is that on this test, I tell the kids, you're not trying to make a 70 or make a 100 on the test. You're trying to meet or beat the national average. And most kids in the nation are going to start at number 1, and it's a time test. And if they run out of time, they're going to run out of time on question number 4. Now, that doesn't mean that question number 4 is necessarily a super low-scoring test. However, it's oftentimes a pretty easy question. I think it's usually one of the easiest questions on the test. Every other year, it seems that it's a graphing question where they can either read a graph or make a graph. That's not too hard for kids. A lot of times it tends to be a human population kind of question, and most of the kids can do pretty well on that. And there's something that you said also for your, as a kid is starting, if they start out and they feel like they're already doing well. If they feel like, wow, okay, I did that, I knew all that, now let's move on, rather than starting already with the kind of mindset of, wow, that was pretty hard, I don't know if I'm going to pass this test, et cetera. Just, something else that I think is important. So I tell them to start with number 4. Then I tell them to do 1, 3, and 2. And let me explain why here by going through what these are. Question number 1 is going to be a DDQ, and I've got examples of this after the PowerPoint to show you if you've not looked at them. A DDQ means it's a document-based question, and that means they're going to have to read a little newspaper article. It's always the Fremont Examiner. It's always about the town of Fremont, and the town of Fremont is doing something or asking some question or something. So they read the article and answer some questions about it. That's question number one. Question number two is the math question. Now, that does not mean that there might not be math on other questions. There absolutely can be math on other questions as well. However, this is the really hard math question where they're going to probably need to do some sort of dimensional analysis, multiple steps, oftentimes using very large numbers. So this is what most students would tell you is the most difficult question on the test. That's why I say do it last. Question number 3 and 4, they're just typical old FRQs. They're going to ask you something about something and see what you know, and some environmental issue out there. And so, but between 3 and 4, I think 4 is usually easier than 3. So that's why I tell them to start with number 4, that if a kid is going to run out of time, they're not going to get to number 4, since it's a time test. So go ahead and start with number 4. That's probably pretty easy. Get your points there, so then you're not, if you run out of time, you're running out of time on question number 2. That's probably extremely low scoring anyway. Any questions so far?
Does not
Cindy?
look it. Nope, does not look it.
On the next point, they have to show their work on the math. They can get no points. Even if you can do it in your head, I tell my kids you need to show your work. Maybe it's just, 5 times 2. And obviously you can do that in your head. Well, they need to write down 5 times 2 equals 10. As silly as that seems, they can get a point for setup and no point if maybe they said 5 times 2 is 7. Well, they could get the point for the setup even though they got the wrong answer. But if they write down 10 with no setup, they get no points because there's no work. I tell my kiddos to make sure that they write their answers in the answer document, not in the test booklet. They're going to be given a test booklet, or at least they always have before. I did see an email that said maybe they're not getting the extra booklet this year. I'm not sure, but it's like green and pink paper, and a lot of kids will do their math on that because they're trying to figure it out. They're doing their scratch work, and then when they finally think they got the answer, they transfer the answer over to the answer document, but they don't transfer so again, they're not going to get any points on the math. That's obvious. Again, this is for my students. The next one is a biggie, and this is a mistake made by thousands of kids, and all answers must be written in complete sentences. No questions asked. Now, I think one of the confusing things about that is that the rubric is bulleted. So the kids, if they look online, if they're studying rubrics, if their teacher is using rubrics in class, they see the bullets, they assume they can bullet. They cannot bullet. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was grading the question about dams, damming the river. And question number 1A said, give 2 benefits of dams. Well, the best answers were dams provide hydroelectric power and flood control. Not the best answers, but the most commonly right answer was those 2. Most people knew that. Well, the problem being, if they just wrote hydroelectric power and flood control as in 2 bullets, they got 0 points. But if they wrote a very short sentence, dams provide hydroelectric power and flood control, period, they got 2 points. That is a huge difference on an FRQ between 2 and 0. And that's the kind of kid that you look at it and you go, man, this kid knows something, they learned what dams do, and I can't give them any points. So that's a biggie.